good to be with you. I think you guys, most of you were with me for number one. And so we talked in session one about introductory matters. We're obviously studying apologetics, giving good answers to hard questions is kind of like the title I'm giving it. And one of the hardest questions we might face actually is the question, how can you prove that there's a God? That's a good question. I'm thankful. That's why I say it's a hard question. It's a good question. One that we might want to have an answer to. And historically, this is really the first topic that we have to deal with any study of apologetics. It really begins with the introductory matter that I presented last time concerning different approaches. So just to kind of refresh you a little bit, we talked about kind of the why of apologetics. Why are we studying apologetics? What's its usefulness? The primary for us being I think historically there's a political reason. We want to be able to defend the faith in light of, in history, oppression and saying we're actually good for the nation, or we're clarifying our position. And additionally, we're seeking to have our own faith strengthened. It's helpful to have good answers to the questions that can be troublesome. It ought to encourage your faith. It ought to strengthen your faith. But then also, it's not just for us. It's for those that we're going to encounter, because we recognize that our society has a worldview, and that worldview, generally speaking, is not the worldview that we share. And so if we're going to bridge that gap in a conversation, we're going to encounter practically questions from an opposing worldview, and we want to be able to give a reasonable defense of Christianity and all that is taught in the Bible. And we can do that in a number of ways, and we're actually going to get into that somewhat tonight. But there's quite a bit we can do in apologetics concerning reason alone to establish some of our arguments apart from special revelation. And we're going to talk about that somewhat tonight, that there's so much then we can do apart from the Word of God, but there are things that we can't do apart from the Word of God. And so we're going to kind of look at that distinction somewhat tonight, even as we get into arguments for the existence of God. That doesn't mean we're going to be looking at Genesis 1 necessarily. We're talking about arguments that are simply presenting a rational case for theism. What we won't be able to do with much of what we talk about tonight, and I'm going to kind of get at this as weaknesses of some of these arguments, is that we can likely establish a precedent for a God or gods, but it's difficult, I would say impossible really, to establish the monotheistic Trinitarian God of the Bible apart from special revelation. You're going to have to employ Scripture at some point to define who the being is that you've just laid a compelling case for. And so that's what we're talking about, is simply getting somebody from the place of atheism would mean no God, atheism, to a point where we're putting a stone in their shoe sufficiently that it becomes more and more difficult to hold that position. So that we're hoping in a conversation that we can get somebody from a place of having a worldview that's naturalistic and atheistic, and they would be bothered by the lack of rationality of their position to the extent that we might move them an inch closer to accepting a God. We get them to agnosticism at that point. Then we must open our Bible. Even in the midst of that conversation, hopefully you can combine elements, or after, and say, now let me tell you about this God and how he's revealed himself. And that's a whole, you could spend hours with people talking through one topic to the next, and that's kind of what we're doing. Realistically, your conversations are quicker, but they might be running. And so I just want to get into kind of why are we talking about this topic first. Obviously, if you look at the tentative schedule, which I think you know at this point, if you were with me last time, we're abandoning that schedule that's on like the students' web page. We're not abandoning the topics, we're abandoning the pace. And so I'm fully expecting that we're going to go into the summer, and when we voted last time, we voted to chase the rabbits as we go. And so as I kind of get going this morning, I just want to remind you, I'm talking a lot right now because it's just a little intro, a monologue, whatever. But I fully want you guys to be participants in this, because this is teaching, not preaching. And so at any time, if you have a question or you want to just throw a wrench in the gears and try to get a good answer to something you're thinking about, that's fully welcome. If you go, well, what about this? Then we're going to entertain that thought, because we may not get through all of this tonight. I intend to. I think we'll be done around 8 o'clock. I think we can do it. But also, if we don't, I won't lose any sleep tonight. And so because we've already established that we're okay with moving at the pace that we want to go at through this. If we have questions, then we want to try to track them down. That being said, I told you the weakness of doing that rather than just earmarking interesting topics and coming back to them in the summer, which that's what we voted not to do. The disadvantage is that I've not prepared an answer to every question that you might have. And so my knowledge is at times going to be insufficient. I would say probably frequently it'll be insufficient if you have a really particular question. I'll do my best to answer, and I'm sure others of us here can fully contribute to that conversation as well. If you have a good answer, just please go ahead. I'm not necessarily the wisest in this room, just happen to be the one up here. And so we just want to have a good conversation because we're just hoping out of all this to be able to be equipped a little bit better, a degree more, that if we get that question, how can you prove to me that that's rational to believe in a God? You can say, well, I've got a couple ideas here. And you can continue that on. I told you last time, I'm beginning conversations that we won't finish. We won't tie a bow around every thought you might have. In some cases, I might do a sufficient job for you particularly, where you go, I think all my questions have been answered here. Other ones, you might be like, for example, the ontological argument for the existence of God, I'm still scratching my own head on exactly what Anselm was getting at in the Middle Ages. So I think it's a difficult argument to understand, and as we're going to talk about it first, and we could get lost in it all night and still feel not that great about it, and that's how I feel. So, and that's because it's a strange argument from a different culture, and it's just different. It doesn't seem right, and so we'll get into that. But I might not sufficiently answer every question you have, but that's okay. I'm starting conversations that you in your homes, in your own private study, there are plenty of resources to keep studying, and I hope you will, where you have curiosities. I can maybe help if you're like, I have a really interest in this particular aspect. I might be able to suggest some things to you, and I'm going to bring in more, hopefully just more supplementary materials as time goes on, especially when we get into like creation, for example. There are so many good resources that we can start putting in. I mean, some of you know what I'm talking about already. I'm not pretending like this is all new to you, but nevertheless, let's get into it. So kind of the first thing we need to kind of establish is, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about arguments for the existence of God as opposed to creation? There's a method to the order of what we're talking about. We're talking about arguments for the existence of God tonight. Next Wednesday, because of the funkiness of the schedule, the way the weeks work out, we got 5 Wednesdays this month. This is the first Wednesday next week, so we'll be together again next Wednesday, and then the third Wednesday of January. But next time, so arguments for the existence of God tonight, but then argument for the existence of God by miracles will be next time, where we're really just talking about really naturalism versus acceptance of miracles, and how that we want to be defenders of miracles. We fully believe in miracles, and typically the resurrection, if we're going to pick one to go with. And so there's a method to that, because if you remember back to last time, we talked about classical apologetics and the approach that predominated the Christian church for thousands of years was to use the methodology of classical apologetics. And so that method was, does anybody remember anything about that? I know it was a couple weeks ago, but if you do, kind of what was a classical apologetic approach in a nutshell? Or you can look at your notes if you have them too. And I'm not offended if you don't remember, because these are strange terms that you were exposed to maybe for the first time. Yeah, presuppositional was the other one. Good, yeah. Evidentialist, which was the weakest, I thought, of the 3 approaches, personally, in our context. Not a weak approach entirely, but just the weakest for our use. So a presuppositional apologetic approach, just to give you one of the others, is to look at the other person's worldview, examine it, and see where they're borrowing from our worldview. And you're informing them that there are inconsistencies in the system of belief that they have, that they actually don't think what they think, or they'll take from our worldview, despite the convictions that they're, like the worldview that they're saying they associate with. So for example, naturalism. And so if they would hold on to a naturalistic, or we could say that's usually connected with evolution and atheism as well. If somebody holds those 3 together, then really there should be no problem with like certain aspects of morality, like death, for example, right? There's so murder, right, and morality might cease to have any meaning, or ought to cease to have much meaning in that individual, because we're just speeding up the process of natural selection, right? So I told you maybe to just euthanize all of the weak among us ought to not trouble the conscience of a completely devoted naturalist, evolutionary minded thinking atheist, right? But if it does, that's because they're borrowing from a Christian worldview that believes in the dignity of the image of God. And so we can help people understand that if you really believed what you believed, it would be this. But again, the conversation is going to look however that conversation looks, and there's always nuance when you're dealing with individuals. But so to get back to what I was kind of going to, classical apologetics was another one we looked at, and I favored it, and it was the I favor presuppositional in our context, but classical apologetics is often used. You'll use it. It's this two-step approach where we're first establishing the existence of God, and then you're typically going to the resurrection, typically in terms of establishing Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior as you move into the verifiability of the resurrection leads to an evangelistic conversation out of that. If you can get them to be face-to-face with there is a God and who is Jesus in terms of the resurrection and the historicity of that event, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we've now got a dilemma where their worldview is shaken, and we can bring the gospel in really well. And so we established then that in our postmodern society, as we're looking at the topic before us tonight, we need to make a case for the existence of God. That this is an argument that is not new by any means. Of course, like I said, we're going to go back to the 7th century AD with Anselm of Canterbury, and he was creating arguments for the existence of God, right, or reasoning them out. And so it was needed then in medieval Europe, I suppose. It's needed, I would say, more so today, because the general understanding of the populace is not generally theistic anymore, meaning that if you go and talk to somebody at random in court, and even, it's likely that you're going to encounter somebody that does not believe in the existence of God. Or if there is any existence of God, it's agnostic, meaning there might be a God, but I don't want to identify who he or she or it might be precisely. Are we sure there's one God? Lack of definition. Maybe a belief in some kind of higher power, you might say, but not the God of the Bible. Our culture is steeped in naturalism, relativism, postmodern thinking, Enlightenment thinking. And so there's a great need for us. We can't go out into conversations expecting that the individual whom we're talking to already has a firm belief in a God whatsoever, not to mention the God of the Bible. That's just not how it is. And I think we looked at the difference between Acts, where Paul is at the Areopagus in Athens, versus other times when Paul is speaking to Jews. And when he's speaking to Jews, well, they have so much connective tissue, and these Jews already have a sufficient structure, understanding of the God of the Bible, that he doesn't have to go into explanation about who this God is and what he has done, because that's shared history. Whereas with the Athenians in the Areopagus in Acts 17, Paul has to say, or he chooses to say, there is an altar to an unknown God, and he uses elements of their culture, their literature, to help establish a precedent for an almighty being, an almighty God. And he says, that God, what you proclaim, what you don't know, I'm proclaiming to you in truth. And then he begins to lay out a case for the God of the Bible, the one true and living God. And so he's saying you're kind of scratching at something. There's some common grace, general revelation knowledge that you are picking up on, and we're going to get into that tonight a little bit. But now let me declare to you who exactly you're scratching at, what exactly you're looking for. And so we're more so in that society than we are in a Jewish synagogue type context when we go out. Although maybe not. Sometimes you might talk to somebody who has told you they were once a Christian, they've walked away, and there might be some shared understanding. You never know. But typically we ought to establish this first, because it really is the first hurdle to get over. You can't really get into the gospel unless somebody believes that there is a God at all. Because the most fundamental question that we're trying to get somebody to ask is, how can I be right with this God, right? Well, that's the answer is through Jesus Christ. But if they don't believe in a God whatsoever anyways, right, well, there's nothing for them to be saved from. They're not, I'll just go and die, and my body will turn into dust, and the Lion King, the circle of life, that's kind of just the atheistic idea. So we have to establish that there is a God, but not just that. Who is this God? And then how can I be right with him? And so when we walk out into our current culture, we can't assume that the average person has knowledge of who God is. We just can't make that assumption and begin just talking about Jesus. We can, and there's power in the Word of God to do whatever God wants to do, but it's helpful and I think rational to first establish who God is and that there is a God. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that is good. And I think that's kind of that's where we're driving. Where we're driving is we're driving towards the Bible. Because as we talk about the arguments for the existence of God, we're going to get to a point where I've already said this, where we can reason no further. We have to get to the Scriptures. When we get to miracles next time, we're going to get to a point where, yes, there are miracles. You can get somebody to the point where they have to accept the supernatural. But then again, you've reached the block again, because now somebody might accept the supernatural and believe, for example, I'll tip my hat to what we're talking about next week. What about Marian apparitions in the Roman Catholic Church, right? There are miracles from other religions. And so you might, in establishing an argument for miracles being the evidence for the existence of God, you might validate Hinduism, right, as well. And so now we got to get from miracles to Christianity exclusive, right? And explain why certain miracles, right, are, how do we deal with those, right? We're going to talk about that next week. But we can end up validating other religions by that argument as well. And so why are we, what's going to be getting somebody to the point where they would accept the God of the Bible? Scripture. So then we're going to have to get into the historicity, the sufficiency, the reliability of the Old and New Testament text, because otherwise we have nothing to stand upon, right? It's just another book. It's just another miraculous experience. Those are all sorts of religions. We can get to a place of universalism if we're not careful. We can provide a rational argument for universalism from miracles if we're not careful. And we're going to get into that next week. But let's get into this week after I've just talked a whole bunch here. And so we're going to look at different philosophical arguments for the existence of God. And so let's just get into it. You're going to understand this one the least. And so this is the ontological argument. And so as we look at the various arguments, we're going to look at quite a few. And you're going to probably enjoy talking about like the cosmological arguments more than you're going to enjoy what's about to happen over the course of the next 5 minutes. But you just do what all apologetics students do, and you just nod your heads. And you pretend like you know what Anselm was talking about, okay? So let's just get through this. I want you to be aware of the existence of this argument, because it's actually a really intelligent argument, so much so that I don't understand it entirely. And we could argue whether or not clarity matters, and I think it does. But Anselm was just from a different time. And so the ontological argument, I always want to preface, as we talk about philosophical arguments, what we're doing in making a case for the existence of God. Again, what we're doing right now is not making a case, I think we should in practice, but we're not making a case for the existence of the God of the Bible necessarily. We want to do that, and that's our world. That's where we're going to be leading, and I'm not saying you're hiding that from somebody as you're talking, but from a merely academic standpoint right now, as I talk to you, I'm not specifically at this point arguing for how I'm going to be talking is not going to necessarily point you towards the God of the Bible. Now, hopefully in our conversation, that's where you're going. Or I guess in a conversation with somebody else. And it's going to be mixed. Like, it's not going to be as academic in a conversation with somebody. But I'm looking at this ontological argument, and really we're looking at the existence of a supreme being. And so that's a little bit different because we're looking at this philosophically. Is it rational to believe in a God? And if there is a God, what must this God be like in terms of his characteristics to truly be God? Now, I know you, from systematic theology, probably have a lot of answers already to that, but we're kind of looking at this apart from special revelation for a second, and just saying, if I'm talking to an atheist, can I rationally convince them, or can I convince them that it's more rational to accept theism than atheism? And the answer is yes, you can, apart from even bringing the Bible into the equation, which, again, you should bring the Bible in, but we can, apart from the Bible, establish rationality for the existence of a supreme being, which we would call God. So the ontological argument is a logic-based argument rather than an observation-based argument, meaning that the person using the ontological argument believes that logic alone can establish a rightful need for the hearer to then believe in the existence of a God. That there are arguments on the basis of logic, I'm repeating what I was kind of saying in a different way, that would establish theism. And that's what ontological argument seeks to do. And it originates with a man named Anselm of Canterbury in the 7th century AD. And his argument goes like this, okay? God is a being than which no greater can be conceived. Would we agree with that? This is his quotation. God is a being which no greater can be conceived or imagined, right? The greatest imagination of a being and all that he must possess to be the greatest among all the greats. Whoever that being is, we would label God. I would agree with that, right? Although it's a conception of my mind, right? I'm saying this is what I think the greatest would be. Again, you're using your own framework. But if we just think, what would be the greatest being ever? What would that being have to have and not have, right? Goodness, we want goodness, right? A good being that is all supreme is better than a bad being that's all supreme, right? So we would label that God is a being than which no greater can be conceived. Then he argues that existence as a characteristic versus non-existence, right? Existence is greater than non-existence, if we're labeling characteristics. It is a supreme being that exists is greater than a supreme being that does not exist, right? Good. Therefore, the greatest possible being must have existence as a necessary attribute of who they are. Otherwise, a greater being who exists is possible intellectually. Right? So if we're going to believe in a supreme being, maximum greatness, that being has to necessarily has to actually exist in order to be the greatest being. Otherwise, there could be a being that has the exact same characteristics but actually does exist, and then that being would be God. Okay, now we might, in talking about this, establish polytheism, right? You're kind of seeing this as a little dangerous to establish multiple great beings of different gradation, right? And that's why I'm saying it's a logic-based argument, right? It's just logical, and it's weak, right? It's Middle Ages. Yeah? Sure. Only one greatest God, yeah. Right. Yeah, and so what Tyler's saying is that even though it might establish multiple supreme-ish beings, there would still end up being one supreme of supreme. being, which we would call God. And I would say that's true, right? We just might, in even doing that, it still is not what the Bible teaches. Even if the Bible teaches that there is one God who exists eternally in three persons, right? And there aren't like underling gods, right? There's creator and creation. This argument might, where it gets weak, is that it could establish like demigods, or like sub-gods, right? Well, that's not the biblical worldview, right? So there are holes in this argument, I think. It does something, but it doesn't do everything, if that makes sense. And so God is a being than which no greater can be conceived. That being must have existence as a characteristic in order to be the greatest being. Otherwise, that being would not be the greatest being. There could be one that could be conceived that is greater, right, using his language. And then this greatest possible being is God. That'd be step 3 of his argument. And for him to truly be God, he must exist. Okay, we got that. This supreme, then, greatest being must also be good, because to be good is better than to be bad. Thus, the greatest being must also be the most good being possible. And so he's saying it's logical to believe in a greatest being. If we have beings of a lesser value, that points to there might be a being of a greater quality. Then you would trace that to who's the greatest being. And then now we've defined God, and he must exist. And that's how you get the ontological argument for God's existence. What do you guys think are we've already mentioned some, but what would you say is like some of the weaknesses of this theory? Besides what I said about kind of polytheism, and it's not a biblical worldview necessarily. Yeah. He is. Yeah, definitely he is. Yeah.
He's establishing, I think, a single God.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah, Anselm's certainly trying to establish monotheism with his argument. It just, in my mind, it can't quite. Yeah. It still might establish a pantheon of sorts. Yeah. No, exactly right, and that's why it's a good logical argument. I would say there are better arguments in our modern context, which we'll get into, but it is a good argument. It's not wrong. It's not bad. Yeah. Yeah, Seth. Yeah. Totally. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And that is pretty consistent with kind of the way Anselm's world was, because there was a lot of preconception of the existence of God. And so what Seth is saying, I have it in different words. It assumes that just because you can imagine something doesn't mean that being actually exists. Right? So his argument is that if you can imagine a greatest being, that being must actually exist. And so the validity is in my imagination of the existence of God, which is what modern atheisms would attack. Well, you just think that just because it's rational doesn't mean that God actually does exist. You can think that all you want, and there might be some logic, but it still exists in your own conception of his existence. There's not empirical evidence of God's existence. Yeah. So I think that's where it's weakest. I think that's where the argument's the weakest, because it depends upon our own ability to conceive of a greatest being. Well, what if we just are conceiving of, I can say God is a 50-ton hippo, right? Just because I can logically work my way in a syllogism, like you're saying, Seth, to that doesn't mean that God is a 50-ton hippo, right? That's not right. So, an argument can't. If it's in the imagination, we're arguing logically. We're not getting to anything empirical, right? That's why miracles, I think, are one of the best arguments for the existence of God, because they're verifiable, right? They're empirical. There's evidence, right? You got to deal with the reality of miracles if you're a naturalist. I think that's a better, it's going to appeal more to, well, okay, I can't, yeah, that happened. I have to deal with that. How am I going to deal with that? What happened here? You have to work harder to be an atheist with miracles than you do with this. Yeah, Lisa. Yeah. 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 Yep. Yes. Yes. Right. Right. Yeah, it doesn't, yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. It's got a lot to do with you. I think this, well, okay, that's weaker, right? Yeah, I agree. Any other comments about weaknesses? I think we hit the ones I was thinking of. Okay, what are some strengths of this theory, if you can think of any? Sure, yeah. It can tell us some things about, we're using our moral worldview, right, from the Bible to establish what is good and bad, right? So again, we have hurdles to jump over sometimes with people who would disagree with that, but it does. I think the best strength of the theory is that it just makes sense, generally speaking. It's not irrational, but I see more weaknesses of this theory. In my own understanding of it, there might be more nuances, and it might be stronger than I'm presenting it to you now, because I told you I have limited understanding of this theory. It's hard for me to get my mind around fully. When you read Anselm, or when you read writings on this, it's more complex than I've presented it to you. But I have a hard time, I would have a hard time using this, I think, with somebody, because there are better arguments for God's existence that I think would do a better job at addressing the weaknesses we've just talked about. Yeah, and so, this I guess one more weakness. The ontological argument assumes that there is an ability to distinguish between good and bad. We have that assumption built in. And it's just not relativistic. And so that can potentially be met with challenge from a postmodern who says, who are you to say what is good and bad, or what is great and worse, right? You're utilizing your own standard to establish the gradation that would judge what a greatest being must be, because it's according to your own worldview, your own preconceptions of what greatest would be, to which we would reply, that's correct, right? I am, out of my own worldview, which is a biblical worldview, that is the framework through which I'm assessing right and wrong, good and bad. That's correct. We wouldn't deny that. But a person who's a relativist would say, it doesn't matter what your standard is, because my standard is this. And so the best God for me would look like this, right? And now that's the insanity of relativism, but it can be used, it could be employed, and you'd have to deal with that, and it'd be tricky, right? It'd be actually a good conversation. You get into fixed morality, and that's another night, but morality is a great argument for the existence of God, but anyways. Okay, next, let's move on. The cosmological argument for the existence of God. Rather than a logic alone based argument, this is an observation-based argument. These are typically more effective in my mind. And so the word cosmological comes from the root of cosmos, right? So when you hear the word cosmos, you think of, space or something, right? And so the word cosmos in the Greek is a reference to the world. And so the cosmological argument is based on an observation of the world and the way the universe works. That we're making observations at creation, and we're saying creation and all of its complexity speaks strongly to the existence of a creator as the most logical explanation for what we are observing in our limitedness, right? And so typically the cosmological argument uses the concept of causality to establish God's existence. That causality meaning that there are a sequence of causes that then are traced. And so let me say this, and I'll show you a little video. Everything in the cosmos, in the universe, depends on a being that must exist necessarily. He cannot not exist because of causality. That our observation of everything having a cause, which had a cause, which had a cause, ultimately keeps going backward until you finally reach the uncaused causer, right? The one who must initiate all of the causes, right? All the reasons why this happened, it caused this, which caused this, which caused this. And you trace it backwards, and you get to a logical, well, who initiated the initial cause, right? And so causality established that there must necessarily be a being who initially caused. He cannot not exist, or how did this begin? And so it's a lot like this, if it plays. This is the unmoved mover theory. Yes. All right. We made it. What an awesome dominoes. If you ever play with dominoes, now you will never think about dominoes the same way again, because dominoes are a good illustration for the cosmological argument for God's existence. Specifically, Aristotle's unmovable mover theory. And so this unmovable mover theory is exactly what we're talking about. I'm talking about causation, and then you start tracing it back. Eventually you get, if we think of each cause, right, each action of existence, of all things, of all creation, right, not just human activity, but all activity, right? If we think of that as a series of causes, right, then we could trace every cause back all the way. If we could magically have an ability to track down every cause and see them narrow and narrow and narrow until there's initially one cause, the origin of the universe. Standing on the other side of that domino is God, who initiated the initial cause. And that being, whoever is the uncaused causer, must himself be uncaused, because if he has a cause that created him, he ceases, then we keep going backwards, right? And so eventually you have to reach an unmovable mover, aka an initiator, a person that knocks over the first domino that is not affected by all the dominoes. It's independent from the creator-creature distinction. And so that's the unmovable mover theory. I'll talk a little bit more about it. A naturalistic worldview. You know what I mean when I say that? Somebody who believes in naturalism, who has that worldview, believes only that that the elements of creation is all that there is. So there is no supernatural. That all is, versus, you have natural versus supernatural, right? And when we talk about supernatural, we're talking about supernatural activity from God, or demons, right? Or all sorts of things like that, right? And not ghosts. We're not going into paranormal, okay? We're talking about natural versus supernatural. So a miracle will be supernatural, right? It's above natural. It's other. And natural, then, the other side would be everything you see, touch, anything that's observable, right? The chairs in the room, right? They're natural. And so if you have a naturalistic worldview, you believe that there is no supernatural, right? And so that there's always a natural explanation for all that is. When you believe that, it's tightly conjoined with atheism, which believes that there is nothing, right? And this is, to an extent, we would agree that we wouldn't discount the natural world. We believe in these things, right? We understand that there's a fixed amount of matter in the entirety of the universe, and that this matter goes through different states, right? Solid to liquid, liquid to gas, and that energy is exuded, but all the energy, right, that there is, and all the matter that there has a fixed amount. It just changes, right? You eat food, and it gives you energy, but then there's waste, and that waste goes to the ground. And again, this is Mufasa, right? The circle of life, right? That's a fixed amount of matter, and that it just goes through different chemical processes and natural things, right? And And so if you have a naturalistic worldview, we would agree to an extent that there is a natural world where there are chemical reactions. We don't deny the existence of chemical reactions, for example, right? And causes of why did the water turn to ice? Well, we all know, is there more water here now? Or is there more H2O, right, when it turns into ice, as opposed to no, it's the same quantity, different state, right? This is basic physical science understanding. And so a naturalistic worldview believes that all we see occurring are a byproduct of merely natural processes. And I would say much of our existence, we do just deal with natural processes, right? You're not expecting the water to supernaturally boil, right? You're operating within the creation and how God has designed things to work. He does intervene supernaturally, and when that happens, a supernatural event violates the laws of nature. That's what makes it a miracle, is that it's a violation of the laws of nature. People don't rise from the dead apart from supernatural activity, right? That's what makes a miracle, is that it's not natural, it's supernatural. And so a naturalistic worldview believes that all that we see is a byproduct of merely natural processes. If we symbolize everything that ever occurred by a domino that goes into motion, you can trace the chain reaction backward until you ultimately have to have an unmoved mover. I said this, I'm just summarizing. And so the unmoved mover is not moved upon, otherwise there could be another in the chain previous to that mover that is unmoved. And then that being would be the unmoved mover. And there must, no matter how far back you go, there must be an unmoved mover. That's logical to assert. There must be an original, unmoved one who, quote unquote, knocked over the first domino. We see the logic of this. You guys kind of see that. That's logical to believe. This being, then, we're saying the unmoved mover is God. Again, we're not saying the God of the Bible at this. I mean, your conversation might include that, but I'm not. But a God, a supreme being that stands outside of this whole naturalistic processes and initiated, right? Now, I could get into so many things. We don't believe that it's God wound up the clock and took his hands off and it just kind of ran its course, right? Which would be deism, which some of the founding fathers believed. We believe that God is still very much at work in the creation, right? And so there's further clarification that we can make. But generally speaking, this provides a good logical reason why we might be rational to believe in an unmoved mover, for example, who is God. Because this God, then this unmoved mover, must be able to stand outside of the natural processes because he is the causer of them. That lets us in on a little bit of who this being is, right, in terms of power and ability to initiate the universe, right? That says something about the character and nature of this being, which we know is God. And so, any just thoughts about this theory right now that you have, or questions, or any of that sort? I think it's pretty easy to understand, but... So what about the Big Bang? How does that correlate with this? You might be thinking it. There's a temptation to utilize the naturalistic worldview, or the atheistic, or I should say Darwinian explanation of the Big Bang, to assimilate that into this argument. To say, listen, even you, atheists, believe in an origin of all the causation of chemical. If all we are is a series of chemical reactions, biological activity, right, changing of phases of matter, energy being expended, but the laws of nature are that there's always a fixed amount of matter. At that point, we still have not. Here's where am I going with this? I'm kind of losing a little bit of my steam here. Yeah, moving on. What was I saying? Somebody help me. I'm losing my train. Yeah, Tyler. Yeah, Big Bang. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm back. Okay, sorry. Again, 9 hours in the car today, right? So, you might want to use the Big Bang theory to kind of say, see, even you believe that there was an origin, an unmoved mover might have caused the Big Bang, for example, right? And of course, some atheists, some people who hold to the Big Bang would say that matter is eternal, right? And all the matter was condensed into, some textbooks would say, into a dot smaller than the period on your page. All the matter and it was and then boom, right? Just exploded because of all the pressure. But what caused that, right? You might be tempted to say, see who caused that, and use the Big Bang as an argument. That was the unmoved mover. That was God. I would say, be careful. Because when you do that, now depending on what you believe about the age of the universe, for example, you might have an uphill battle in discussing creationism, right? If you utilize the theories of evolution to prove the existence of God, unless you hold to an old earth creationist view, then I guess you could use it. But I don't, and I'll argue for young earth creationism when we get there. But if you're a young earth creationist, you're not going to want to use the Big Bang as a side-by-side or as an example for the unmoved mover theory. I don't think you should do it because that's not how God created. God didn't create with a Big Bang and a whole bunch of years. God said, let there be light. And then it seems as though, if you read Genesis, God seems to be geocentric in the creation, meaning he's hovering above the waters of presumably the earth. So where is God located in creation once he creates creation? It seems like he's at earth, right? And darkness was over the face of the waters. And so when you look at Genesis 1, you don't see boom, and then those all the big particles of the boom collecting themselves into universes, and then collecting themselves into solar systems, and then there's one solar system that produced a planet, Earth, but then, you know what I mean? You start to get, that's not how the Bible talks, right? God's over the face of the waters, and he says, let the heavens be separated from the heavens, right? He seems to be geocentric, right? He seems to be at the earth in the creation. So you don't want to, again, you're going to have to, the Big Bang assumes that the particles of that bang eventually collected themselves. And how did gravity form? You know, we're talking about crazy things right now, right? Like, how did they collect themselves? We're going to have to answer that, right? How did the particles that just went boom all of a sudden start deciding that some went together? How did that work, right? How big were there different varying sizes of things in the boom? And so then the big ones got the small ones. You know, we got to, okay, I'm going on now. You see the rabbit that I'm chasing, right? You don't want to use this because somebody can say what I'm just saying. And you're like, well, I guess the Bible, okay, yeah. God said let there be light, right? And that's what we believe, and that he was there. He brought the land, right? There's things in creationism like where things come before other things that are dependent on those other things. So like when God creates plants before the sun, you know that a lot of time didn't elapse because plants be dead if there be no sun, right? So again, a weakness, something you don't want to do, I don't think, even though it's tempting, and you've probably heard of individuals using the Big Bang as kind of an example to be utilized when talking about the unmoved mover theory. See, even you believe that because you believe that unless you believe that matter is eternal, there must be someone on the other side of the Big Bang that initiated the Big Bang. Well, when you do that and you use the Big Bang, you've just utilized a piece of their worldview, and now you got to deal with that piece that you just used, right? When it says things contrary to what Genesis 1 and 2 teaches concerning the origin of the universe, right? So just be careful. I'm slow I would be very slow. I just don't think I would use that. And I think maybe it makes sense to you. I think I've said why. So, any questions on that? I know that's a common one. You'll hear that. Or you'll even see it on like Facebook, little things. You'll see it where people use that, and I'm like, well, I get what you're trying to do there, but you've eaten a small bite of a bigger disaster when you use that, theory. Now you're dealing with the eternality of matter. There's all sorts of things you're dealing with when you accept the Big Bang. Because it doesn't come from our worldview. It comes from theirs. Now, Paul, right, we're thinking back to Acts 17. Well, he used aspects of their thinking, and so I'm not saying it would be entirely wrong at times to use aspects of their naturalistic worldview and say, hey, you're scratching at something here, right? The theories point towards, like the Big Bang, what it does do, meaning like the Big Bang is kind of tracked by the reality that the universe is expanding, and maybe it's coming from a central location, right? And so if we were able to trace that back, there seems to be like maybe an origin point of, I don't know how you observe this, by the way, but nevertheless, right? And it might not be entirely wrong if you're in a situation to bring up maybe the Big Bang in the sense of, it seems as though your worldview is even trying to scratch at there being an initial cause of the universe. My worldview does the same thing. I just believe that it's clear that it happened this way. And let me tell you why it's pretty clear that it happened this way. So I'm not saying you would discount that aspect of their worldview. I think it actually could be helpful in conversation as long as you still keep a differentiation. You kind of say, you're scratching at something here, that actually there is truth in what you're saying. The truthfulness, the commonality we have is that we think that there is an initial cause. However, the initial causer is God, whether in your worldview or mine. However, the Bible says more about how the cosmos actually did come into existence, how the unmovable mover did begin moving, right? And it happened in a particular way. What you know in ignorance, we know, and I now declare to you in truth, right? Here's what Genesis 1 and 2 has to say about this. Yeah.
Modern cosmologists all believe.
Right.
They
Yeah.
do not believe that usually
Right.
eternal.
Yep.
They reject that because they know
Right.
it's not true.
Right. Right.
Evidence is proven that it had a
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah.
So start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. There are other arguments. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we both share that we believe there's an origin.
Yeah.
Well, how did it start then? All right, well, good question, right? Yeah. Other comments, thoughts? That's a good one, Steve. This is big brain stuff, right? This is like, oh, okay. Didn't think I'd be dealing with that tonight, right? So, again, I'm not saying you don't use the Big Bang. I'm saying you be careful in how you use the Big Bang. We want to keep our worldview distinct. We don't need to use their worldview to make our case, right?
To me, the Genesis is local. It's talking about this earth,
Exactly right. Yep.
And what it takes to support this earth, was brought into it. Like
Right.
I said, you have to have
Right. Absolutely.
you have to have the gravitational.
Right. Yeah, we don't believe in the Big Bang as Christians because it's not how God describes the origin of the universe in the Bible. And it's as simple as that. Now, this is why we're getting at it by the end of this lecture, but we're going to have to talk about the Bible then. Why believe what the Bible says? Good question.
There's a idea called privileged planet.
Yeah.
And it's really simple. It's
Right.
easy to follow. And it shows why we're unique, why this planet is unique.
Yeah.
Very
Absolutely.
unique,
Yeah.
almost uncopyable.
Right. Yeah, we're about to get into that more too. Yeah. Good. Do we understand that argument? So what would you say, just rapid fire, what are the strengths of this argument that you see? Yeah. Yeah, establishing a beginning. That's good. What you have to do when you move to an evangelistic conversation begins with God, right?
I think you can use this argument well. Science verifies it.
Right. It's observable.
Not philosophical reason.
Right.
True science
Yep.
matches this.
Right. Right. Absolutely. We're using our of just observation. This is the way things are.
Empirical evidence.
Yeah. It's logical, but it's based on evidence as well, right? It's observable. Yeah. Good. So let me ask you this. How might you move to the gospel if you're thinking about, you're talking about the unmoved mover theory with somebody, you're getting to a place where you're trying to explain that it's more rational to believe in an uncaused causer than to not believe, right? To just believe that this is all just eternal, right? That there was never a cause. That's really the other argument. And that seems illogical, right? We're agreeing that that's illogical to believe that there was never a causation of the universe, that the universe is itself eternal, which actually is what naturalistic thinking has moved towards. It's like the eternality of the universe. That's happening in thinking right now, or it's been around for a while, actually. How might you then move, if you're thinking about how can I go from this to the gospel, right? I've kind of just talked about with somebody about the unmoved mover theory. How do you think you might go to the gospel from there? Yeah. 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 Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Sure. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Moving to purpose. If there is a God, what is yeah, and then again we're moving into scripture, right? We have to, because then you gotta get to special revelation. I think a good one is to go to the theme of judgment, talking about God being, if he's the beginning, he's also the end. If you want to make a quick move, right, to scripture, you might go to like Revelation 22, talking about that God is the Alpha and the Omega. And so the God who initiated all things return to him. And what will that be like, right, if you stand before him? How can you then stand before this one, right? So yeah, moral law is a really great way. You're starting to talk about the nature of God and what he's called us to do and how we can be right with him. Obviously going to the gospel then. Yeah, that's good. Both are good. Okay, next. A teleological argument. There are 4 teleological arguments that we're going to talk about. But this is another argument from observation. The argument is that the appearance of design and the appearance of purpose in the universe implies a designer. So we're observing design. That implies that there is a designer. And that's logical. If we can successfully establish that there is design, that it's more probable to believe that there is design than chaos or random, that what we observe is all an occurrence of random, indiscriminate of what our desires are processes, that just happens to be this way, we would say that's not as rational as saying things seem to be designed, like they have a function, like there's purpose, like there's complex purpose actually in how all things work. That design implies a designer. That's very logical. And there's 4 arguments that we're really going to look at, subcategories of teleological arguments that we're going to look at. The first one is the fine-tuning of the universe theory. Maybe you're familiar. I'm trying to get it to the next. Here we go, fine-tuning of the universe. And so this is a really strong argument. What we're saying is that everything must be, I'm going to put in quotes, just perfect, right? Just so perfect in order for there to be life. The slightest variation of a universal constant would mean extinction. If we can establish that principle, we're going to be shocked by the statistical improbability of maintaining a naturalistic worldview concerning how in the world there could be this earth with all of its complexity, all the fine-tuning, not just of this earth, but of the universe itself, and how all things work according to a plan and statistical improbability that is just monstrous to deal with. And so, for example, if gravity had been stronger, or here are some of the examples. If gravity had been stronger or weaker by 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, that's very, it's a small amount, very, very small amount. If gravity was just a little bit stronger, like tiniest amount, or a little bit weaker in terms of its force, physics, then life-sustaining stars like the sun could not exist, which would make life impossible. That's from Robin Collins, an article I had. Another one, as the earth moves in its orbit around the sun, it departs from a straight line by only 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. If it departed by 1/8 of an inch, we would come close enough to the sun that we would be incinerated. If it departed by 1/10 of an inch, we would find ourselves so far from the sun that we would all freeze to death. That's from Science Digest, an article in 1981, that research. Another one, if the moon were moved closer to Earth by just 1/5 of its distance, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day they would reach 35 to 50 feet high over most of the surface of the Earth. The probabilities involved, this is a quote from a website, the probabilities involved with the fine-tuning of the universe aren't comparable to winning the lottery or being struck by lightning. Lottery odds are represented using 8 or 9 digits, example 1 in 10 to the 9th power. So a 10 with 9 zeros after it, okay? That's what that means. So like humongo, right? We're talking trillion, right? Randomly dealing a deck of 52 playing cards in perfect order represents odds of 1 in 10 to the 68th power. I don't know if I have this for you or not in your notes. Physicists express the odds of randomly arranging universal physical constants in the present arrangement, so what we observe, in using numbers more like 1 in 10 to the 120th power. And so it is that many more zeros. We're talking about the likelihood 1 in 10 to the 9th power for the lottery, 1 in like whatever that is, a trillion or quadrillion, whatever that is, number of zeros, as compared to what we observe in the natural world. The probability of this is 1 in 10 with 120 zeros after it. Statistically impossible. I mean, so okay, can I talk for a second? The pushback you might get is, what about if this is all just a multiverse? Okay? Now we're getting into like Spider-Man stuff, right? Like maybe there's an infinite amount of universes and we happen to exist in the one where we did hit that ridiculous lottery. I think it's less, that is quite the philosophical backflip, I would say. If we're talking about statistical probability, it is more likely, in my mind, if we're talking about logic alone, that there's a God who designed this than there is that we live in one of infinite amount of multiverses. And that there's just death in every single other one of them, that we're in the one. Well, if it's infinite, then I guess there are more than one, right? Now we're dealing with Spider-Man, like an alternate version of Alex coming in and punching me in the face right now, right? Like, that's illogical. We ought to instinctively go, that is far less probable. It is more rational to believe in a creator who created than to believe in a multiverse theory. Though we can't say that that is impossible. We'd say, okay, it's just far less probable. And obviously we have a conviction concerning special revelation, so we say it's not so. But it's way less probable. If you want to hold to that theory, you have to have more faith to believe that than you do to believe that there is a God who created all this and he designed. That's a concession that individual must make at that point. I would say you have more faith than I do, statistically speaking, and that is true. It's more logical to believe my worldview. Yeah, and so it is far more probable that there is a designer and that this designer is God. And so the fine-tuning of the universe, meaning that the universe, what it requires to make life and all the smallest variations that could occur would cause extinction, such that for things to be the way they are, it's far more likely that there's a creator than that we're in an infinite, vast multiverse. Yeah.
And if they say, well, you don't believe in faith.
Right. Yeah.
The difference is your faith is in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Our faith is in the creator.
Right.
Because they're believing what their brain
Right.
is telling them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So their faith is in their brain. They do have faith.
Yeah.
And it's based on what the substance of their faith is what their brain is telling them.
Right.
So ultimately, their faith is in their brain.
Right. Yeah.
Itself.
Yeah.
Their self-conscious
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
instead of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Agreed. Any other comments on that theory? If you have any, or we'll keep rolling. We got 19 minutes. I don't think we'll get through it all. Be hard pressed. Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. And so that's good. I would say, yeah. So far as we can record, this is the number we've arrived at. It could be even less probable, right? Yeah. Because the business of science is to make observations and create hypotheses based on those observations that can then be testable or can be observed over a period of time, and patterns can be tracked to arrive and say, is this hypothesis plausible? The more plausible the hypothesis based on the evidence, the stronger the scientific theory, until a greater, more plausible explanation is arrived at. A new hypothesis that has more evidence arises and then becomes a better prevailing scientific opinion, right? The most plausible explanation, scientifically, based on the numbers, is theism. That's scientific fact. Whether it's disregarded due to the presuppositional, right, decisions of the human who Romans 1 is suppressing the truth about God is another thing. Because we're not merely natural. We have souls that were rebelling against God. And so again, our argumentation takes us into the realm of rationality, but not theology necessarily. We're going to have to talk about why are you suppressing. Is there a reason why you won't accept this as the more rational option? The reason is because of sin, because you don't want to believe the truth. Romans 1 talks about this. Yeah.
And the true materialist will not acknowledge the mind.
Yeah.
Because the mind is not material.
Sure. Yeah.
So all they'll do is acknowledge the existence of the brain.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Then they got to explain, well, how does the brain
Yeah.
produce knowledge,
Right.
which is not material,
Yeah. Yeah.
with
Right.
material nature.
Yeah, well, and that's because the naturalist doesn't believe in the existence of a soul. That the naturalist believes that we are a complex, that all that you are is a series of biological chemical reactions, neurons firing in the brain causing various matter to do specific activity. And that when you die, that neurological activity will cease, and then your understanding of consciousness and life will cease to be. That you are no more than that. And that religion then would be, in that worldview, a way to cope with, to keep you sane, right? And so the atheist says we're rising above that ignorance. But it's less, again, we're establishing that it's far more logical to believe in theism scientifically, according to the numbers, than it is to believe in, again, I'm saying your only option ends up being like a multiverse theory at some point. And that actually is, again, a popular, you will read articles about this, right? And that shouldn't surprise us that Marvel in the late 1900s, and now in pop culture, multiverse is if you're watching Marvel movies right now, they're all about multiverse. Well, that's because these ideas in nature are fun to play with in entertainment. But Marvel didn't think of these things. They just thought this is a fun thing to do, right? And we'll pick Thor out of the Norse mythology, right? And we'll just take all these elements, we'll throw them all together in entertainment, right? Well, it's appearing in entertainment because the philosophers have talked about, they're pulling from places, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying you don't go watch Spider-Man or something. Again, everything has a worldview, everything has a message. You just need to know how to handle it, right? How do I handle the multiverse theory, for example, right? Yeah. Okay, the argument from intelligent design. This is number 2 of 4. See if we can get all 4. This design, intelligent design, you already kind of know just by those 2 words, not dumb design, right? Not intelligent oopsie, right? Intelligent design, intentionality from an intelligent being. And so creation is ridiculously intricate and complex. We've already talked about a little bit of that with like how far the moon is from, if the moon moved a fifth closer, then welcome to Waterworld, if you know what movie that is from like the 90s, right? Creation is ridiculously intricate and complex. An intelligent cause is necessary to explain the complex structures of multiple things, but I'm saying biology right now, okay? That what we observe is not just there, but it also is incredibly complex. For example, the human eye is a really interesting, for how complex the human eye is. When we think about the camera that is recording this right now as a capability of being 4K. I know there's 8K cameras, and yet we are not really making a dent in comparison to the quality the human eye can capture in terms of what it does. I mean, you think about the human eye and the different parts, right? Like the ability of the muscles to open and close the pupil, and all that happens where it flips, and the image is upside down on the back of your eye, but the optic nerve sends it to your brain and reorients the positioning of what you're seeing. And this is happening live. And color, right? Your ability to perceive color. All the complexity of the human eye is nuts, and you have 2 of them. And so does everyone else. Like, you're all looking at me right now with pieces of hardware that far exceed anything that we're able to create mechanically. Yeah, Ashley. Yeah. Yeah, involuntary human, like you're blinking right now. Your body is regulating the amount of moisture on your eye without you thinking about it. Yeah, Seth. Okay, you're swiping. Good. Yeah, so the human eye is so complex. Intelligent design is the most likely solution, right? Or to answering, how do we make sense of why things are so complex? And in our observation of the natural world, things don't go from less complex to more complex. So when you observe evolution, we observe degradation, right? We would look at the, I guess the evolutionary theory believes that we were once simpler in structure in terms of our ancestry, to the extent that we were once soup and the soup came alive and then created, like biological life, and it was very simple, single cell, right? And it's moved to this complexity in the eye, that it's gone from less complex to more complex, and yet what we observe is that we're degrading, and the world is degrading. That you're not suddenly waking up one morning and there's like a scientific discovery of this new spontaneously created thing out of a leaf that now can broadcast 4K, right? Like things don't go from less complex to more complex in our observation. We lose traits. And so, while some traits can be adjusted, like size and hair length and, like dogs, right? Like there's a variety. There can be adjustments in microevolutionary, I believe in microevolution in that sense. But things don't get to the complexity of the eye. There's just always been eyes. And that's crazy. How did the eye form? Did our ancestors just never see? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, finally the last piece was put together and I can see now. Now this baby can see. Meanwhile, all their babies before that could never see. I mean, we're just getting into what's more probable, right? And so it's impossible for such complexity to occur due to random processes. For example, a room filled with 100 monkeys and 100 computers may eventually produce a few words. If they're just banging on, you might be like, hey, they said the, good, or as. You might get a few words, maybe even a sentence, like the dog was red, right? You might, wow. How long would it take you if monkeys were pounding on computers, 100 monkeys pounding on 100 computers? Finally, you get a sentence. It's going to take a long time. It could happen, though, if time were not, if the monkeys weren't dying, you're supplying new monkeys, right? Finally, you got the dog was red. Okay. That might happen, but it would never produce a Shakespearean play. It's just never going to happen. We would all agree that would be insanity if you put 100 monkeys in a room with 100 computers and after 100 years, all of a sudden you have Hamlet. You're like, wow, that was very improbable. We all agree, right? And so how much more complex is biological life than a Shakespearean play? The sheer improbability because of intelligent design would be comparable to 100 monkeys getting in a room with 100 computers and banging on the keyboard and out comes Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet or whatever you like. This improbability of random chance suggests that it's more logical that there is a God who designed than it is to believe that what we see in all of its complexity came about by chance and natural processes. The odds are simply too great. Yeah. And so, again, I talked about the multiverse theory. I'm going to move past that. But, of course, you could just say, well, this is the one universe that happened to evolve this way. Again, that's a stretch, I think. It is. Statistically, it is. Third theory, any questions about that? Intelligent design. There's so much more we could say. Again, I'm beginning conversations. Irreducible complexity. The fourth teleological argument that we're going to look at. This argument says that there are systems of life or systems that are so complex that to reduce one of the system's part would negate the function of the entire system. And so, if you imagine a system of something, all that it takes for this thing to do what it does, there are multiple parts that are all working together to make that happen. like I said, but the eye, the certain muscles being the way they are to contract and control the amount of light, the aperture of your eye, and then also the optical nerve and all that it does. And right, so if you reduce one of these parts, the ability to see no longer is what we experience to be, at least. And so if you reduce one of the parts of the system, it negates the function of the entire system. And so because of the complexity and the codependency of the parts that we observe in nature, it is far more implausible to believe that these came about by natural processes. Otherwise, you have worthless and unusable elements all around you. You could say, what we observe now is these systems in their completion, right? There was a construction project going on in the construction of these various future evolutionary abilities of sight, for example, or scent, right? Smell. And that the pieces were there, but the final piece finally evolved. And now you have the ability. Well, everyone was blind? There's some lack because the system has components that are dependent upon one another in order for the function to be there. Think about the human body, for example. How about if I took away from your system the ability to excrete waste? Pretty important system, right? Or how about if you don't have a fully developed digestive tract? That's not life. Like you can't produce ancestors, right? Or reproductive incompletion, right? Would be even, well, that's the extinction of the species, right? And so irreducible complexity. We can't reduce the complexity and have life. It ceases to be life. There are components that must exist to have the experience that we have. Okay, I'm really beating the drum here. It's like a mouse trap. There are 5 parts, right? A catch, a spring, a hammer, a holding bar, and a foundation. In order for the mousetrap to function, all pieces must be present, or it ceases to be a mousetrap. It just becomes a thing that does nothing. And so if you remove any one of these parts, the mousetrap is unable to accomplish its intended function, namely the death of many mice, right? Lured to their death. And so it becomes worthless, right? That this thing becomes just a miscellaneous collection of metal and wood at that point. It doesn't have any function. It can't do anything. The system, losing one of its component parts, negates the function of the entire system. Irreducible complexity. We can't reduce this. It's reduced. You can't have a mousetrap without the snappy part. Now it's just a little, you get what I'm saying. So one example would be like the E. coli flagellar system. This would be another example. The E. coli bacteria has a little flagellum, little tail, flappy. That's its motor. That's how it moves right through space and matter. And so the tail for mobility, the flagellar system, it's an irreducibly complex system. And so the E. coli flagellar system is an incredibly microscopic outboard motor which E. coli bacteria use to move around in their environment. It's made up of 40 individual integral parts, including a stator, a rotor, a drive shaft, a U-joint, and a propeller. If any of these parts are removed, the entire system will fail to function. The reality that there are so many irreducibly complex systems, it then necessitates the existence of a designer because such systems could not evolve. And we'll talk about this more when we get to the evolution topic. But you just can't have life. You can't arrive there when you have these systems. I'm not saying you can't reason up an answer. I'm just saying observationally, that's just not how it works. It's statistically less probable to believe that there were dormant systems in creation that served no function, that spontaneously produced functionality because of evolution, than it is to believe that God just made us the way that he made us and it was good. Genesis 1, right? That is more likely, that is more plausible argument for the existence of God. Irreducible complexity, right? We can't reduce it. So therefore, it's more likely that there is an intelligent designer, there is a God who knew exactly what he was doing and created systems in their completion with tons of genetic possibilities for microevolution even in some cases, right? And with varying different abilities, like the way we see and sense things is different than the way dogs do. And some different species, and they can do different things. There's so much complexity, and that it's just far less likely that these systems and the codependency between even macro systems, we could really get into it. Some of you are like, yeah. Start talking about it. And I'm like, no, we'll get there in evolution more. 2 minutes. The argument from beauty. This will be we'll probably end here. Love this argument. Think it's really helpful. In a utilitarian or Darwinistic evolutionary view of the world, beauty is entirely unnecessary. Track with me. Beauty is not needed in an evolutionary worldview. Such a worldview only necessitates reproduction, aka the survival of the species. That is that's the purpose, in a way, of evolution. We're seeking to become a greater version of the species, and the primary function of survival of the fittest and all this thing is every species is seeking to preserve the species, therefore evolutionary advances need to be made to further the existence of the species. And so, in such a worldview, somebody who holds the Darwinistic worldview, where all that matters is reproduction, the survival of the species, and utilitarianism, which says all that matters is functionality, essentially, that a thing accomplishes its purpose. That's all that matters. Beauty is entirely unnecessary, because if the species continues to survive, beautiful or ugly, who cares? Because all that matters is the survival of the species. If staying alive is all that matters, right? Then all that matters is staying alive. Doesn't matter how nice it looks. Now, we all revolt at that because we recognize that there's beauty and we enjoy beauty. We want beauty. We're artistic. We have thoughts about how things ought to be. We're creative. This is given to us by the image of God, right? In us. He's a creator. And yet, so the naturalistic worldview doesn't care how it looks. They do, but just, oh wow, how lucky are we that everything's beautiful? That's kind of that's all that is thought about concerning beauty. But this ought to leave us, if all that matters is the survival of the species, that ought to leave us with the question, why are things beautiful then? If it doesn't matter why things are, if things don't have to be beautiful, then why are they beautiful? If all we need is functionality, then beauty is entirely unnecessary. And so, beauty is an element of design that strongly suggests a designer. That designer is God. And so simply we're appealing to somebody's understanding. This is how we get into general revelation, honestly, is because saying there's the reason why that sunset is beautiful. Right? There is absolutely no practical value to a beautiful sunset. The sun could just go down, and when it ceases to leave the sky, and the sky could be gray, the sun goes down and just turns black. There's no need for all the beauty that we see all around us in a naturalistic worldview. It's completely unnecessary. So its presence demands a response. The best response is that there is a being who designed it to be beautiful for whatever reason. And I think that's compelling. Psalm 19:1 says it this way: the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above his handiwork. And so that really gets us where we need to go. I could replace this, but really gets you to general revelation, because inherent in us, because of beauty and because of the compelling nature of nature, what it speaks to us, how God designed it to be. The argument from beauty really takes us to a point where we got to look at ourselves and go, this is communicating something. Beauty is communicating something about creation. And that communication is that it's illogical to believe that all that matters is just the natural world, because beauty is unnecessary. And so I'm not saying it's the strongest argument. I'm not saying it's going to refute every question that you would get as a follow-up. But I really when somebody holds to a naturalistic worldview, the argument from beauty is it really ought to stump that person and say, you're right. There's no reason why things should be beautiful. And then either you won the lottery and just it happens to be beautiful, right? Or God made it beautiful because he wanted to reveal who he is in all of his grace. Beauty is a grace of God, right? Like, you look good. You don't look disgusting. And I'm thankful I'm not looking at disgusting things right now. And the reason why is because God made it good. That's what the Bible says. He made it good. He made it beautiful. He made it wonderful. And he's going to make the new earth even better. And it's compelling. It says something. I think we recognize this in the hardest moments of our lives. Everyone does. Because, or the most wonderful moments even, like when a baby's born. It's talked about as a miracle. And the reason why is because there's so much beauty in that event. And I think people will be even more open to saying, man, there must be something for this to happen, this complex system, right, of child, that's very complex. And then also there's so much beauty. It tends to, I think it ought to make us go, wow, there's a God, right? There's a creator. It ought to. Let's close. Yeah, let's close. Can you actually convince somebody that there is a God? Question is reason enough to convince someone that there is a God? It's a good question. That's what we've been talking about tonight as we end up closing here. The philosophical arguments for God's existence are logical and convincing. I hope that this has been, you've been like, yeah, it's logical, and these are convincing arguments. They do establish plausibility, strong plausibility for the existence of a God. So can you convince someone else that there is a God? Is reason enough? Yeah, I think so. I think you can get somebody to the point with this argumentation to accept that it's more rational and reasonable to believe that there is a God, theism, than atheism. I think you can get them from atheism to agnosticism at least with what I presented to you tonight. That's as far as you can go with what I've talked about. And that's a good step. It's one we ought to take with people because it takes many times, sometimes many conversations, for someone to go from atheism to salvation. And if we can put a little stone in their shoe that says, you're holding the more illogical position, that's who knows what another person or you might have as opportunity in the future. You can't accomplish everything in every conversation often, but you can accomplish something, and I think this is something you can accomplish with these arguments. I think you can help turn somebody from an atheist to an agnostic with what I've presented to you tonight. But no further. No further. Because I believe that these philosophical arguments work together with general revelation. They can convince someone of theism, but they cannot help someone understand who God is and how someone can be made right with him sufficiently to be saved. That requires special revelation. And so you can get to agnosticism with what we've just talked about. You cannot get to salvation apart from then saying, open up to Romans 1, right? You cannot do so without special revelation. General revelation is sufficient to condemn. Special revelation is sufficient to save. And so we'll make that distinction in more detail next time. Or maybe I'll just push it. I don't know yet. I'm thinking about it to when we talk about the Bible in more detail. But it's important for us to recognize how far we can go with this and where we can't go with these arguments. And understand what you're seeking to accomplish in the conversation when you're talking to an atheist, for example, and you say, it's actually less logical to believe what you believe. Can I explain to you why? And to use irreducible complexity or intelligent design theory, and they go, okay, I see what you're saying. At that point, you might be able to have that conversation and say, can I tell you about the God who actually did create all things? So the next argument might be, I need to now establish the Christian God as the God who I've been talking about, and his legitimacy as the only true and living God. Well, your only option at that point in order to establish the existence of the Christian God, I believe, is special revelation and the argument from miracles. And even the argument from miracles, you're going to have to be careful. We'll talk about that. But if you're going to get to the Christian God as the God, open your Bible to Romans 1 is what the sentence, because we firmly are okay. We fully, convictionally believe that the way to know God is through the means that he's revealed himself, which is his word, and we're not ashamed. We have a lot of evidence to believe that the word came from God himself. We have arguments of our own for that, which we'll get into in a couple times. Any questions at this point? I know we're late, but any questions at this point from anything I'm talking about? I know it's intellectual, we're talking pretty intellectually. Some of you students are doing a good job staying with me, and these ideas, the next time you're exposed to them will hopefully be even more solid in your mind. I know that's the case for me. What I understood 2 years ago, 3 years ago about these things was less robust than my current understanding because you keep studying. Okay, good. Nothing? Anything else? Okay, next week we'll talk about, I think we'll just go to miracles probably, which would be really its own night of talking about the evidence for the existence of God based on miracles. The verifiable reality of supernatural, miraculous intervention that necessitates an actor who caused such a miracle. And we'll get into what about Marian apparitions, if you know what those are, and all sorts of fun things. And I'll see if I can stump you with things. So thank you guys for your time. Brother Steve, would you close us in prayer?